As we talked about on Wednesday, the Mariners ended a bad road trip on a good note, but now it's time to see if that win in Toronto will actually stop the bleeding as the Cubbies come to town for a 3-game set. We'll talk all about it coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, April 12th, 2024. This is Tidy Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, that's LOCKDON, to get yourself started. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. The Mariners are playing host to the Cubs tonight at T-Mobile Park. And this is a team both Colby and I picked to make the playoffs in our preseason predictions a couple weeks ago. Tonight, it's Bryce Miller versus Jordan Wicks. We'll get into that matchup a little later on in the show. But for now, let's just focus on this Cubs team, which is pretty talented. You look at this offense, it's guys like Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki, of course, Cody Bellinger, who re-signed with the team this offseason. Christopher Morel is really talented. Dansby Swanson, Michael Busch, Nico Hoerner. And then they have a pretty interesting bench as well with, guys like Yan Gomes and Garrett Cooper and Nick Madrigal. And then you look at this rotation, which of course took a hit early on in the season with Justin Steele's injury, but they still have plenty of talent in this rotation. We're going to see Jordan Wicks tonight, like I said. We're going to see Shota Imaga, who's off to a really nice start in his major league career tomorrow. I don't believe they have a confirmed starter for Sunday. That might be Javier Assad or Ben Brown. We'll see on that. And then it's a pretty decent bullpen as well with, of course, Hector Neris, who has some beef with this team, has some history with this Mariners team. Adbert Alzolay, Drew Smiley, a favorite of ours. So, pretty solid roster across the board here for the Cubs. What do you make of them heading into this series here in the early going?
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of last year's Mariners team. There's a lot of power in this lineup. There are a lot of guys who will swing and miss on occasion, but they should be balanced out by high contact guys like Nico Hoerner, who's one of the more underrated players in baseball. They have, on paper, really good pitching with a couple of young arms that have really stepped up, and they have a bullpen that is filled with pretty good arms that not a lot of people are talking about. One of them, like you said, they're one of them very familiar to Mariner fans, and Hector Neris, who, not the most beloved character in the game, and has some beef with the Mariners and notably Julio Rodriguez. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. But it's a lineup that's pretty balanced, but it is a slight lean to the right-hander heavy, which should help Bryce Miller tonight. We'll talk about that when we get to Miller. But this is a team that's going to be really solid defensively, right up the gut. Dansby Swanson's very good defensively. Nico Hoerner might be the best second baseman in baseball defensively, and we know that Bellinger can certainly go get it. So they're going to pitch. They're going to throw a lot of strikes, on the mound. They're going to strike out some, and they're going to try and hit home runs. So it is a pitching, strong defense up the middle, defense on the corners. And then their game plan is to draw walks and hit home runs. And that's very similar to what we saw last year for the Mariners. So it's a very talented team. It is a team that, again, I think can make the playoffs. The bullpen is kind of the X factor here, but they have a lot of big arms in that bullpen that can generate lots of strikeouts and get them out of any tight spot. So it's going to be a good series. I think these two teams, they played 100 times. I think Seattle's probably going to win 60 of them. But Chicago playing a little bit better baseball to start the year than the Mariners are. So we'll have to kind of wait and see how these two teams come out and play. The Cubs, I believe, did just drop a series to the Padres. So both these teams coming off of a series loss, and the Mariners certainly are not playing well yet. So it would be nice if they can come out and get a big win. But, when you kind of look at the pitching matchups over the weekend, you probably feel pretty good about Sunday, except Luis Castillo hasn't been great. And we don't even know who the Cubs are throwing. But Saturday, yeah, that's an L.
We'll get to that in a little bit here, but yeah, the Cubs come into the series 7-5. We've talked about how the Mariners have really struggled to control opponents' run games. The Cubs enter this series dead last in stolen bases in baseball. They just have 2. Meanwhile, first place in stolen bases this year, the Washington Nationals, they have 25 steals already through 12 games? Yeah. 12 games for them. So, but the Cubs have been hitting the ball pretty well. 112 WRC plus as a team heading into the series. That's 10th in Major League Baseball. So, pitching staff going to have to be on their A game here for the Mariners. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment with Bryce Miller, who's making tonight's start. But first, a reminder: this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Ibata. Spring is here, so it's out with the old and in with the new, but don't splurge on anything new without getting cash back in return when you use Ibata. Ibata is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies to toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or that fancy dinner you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibata, just add your offers in the app, upload your receipt, and get real cash that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Join over 50 million users and earn cash back every time you shop from over 2,700 brands and retailers, including all your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and a whole lot more. Right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibata by using the promo code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app to start earning cash back and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play Store or App Store and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And just a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So Bryce Miller is coming off of one of his best starts of his young career in Milwaukee. Now he faces a pretty tough Cubs lineup. Like we mentioned, they are they're 10th rather in WRC plus with a 112 WRC plus here in the early going. So what are you going to be looking for here from Miller in his third start of the season, Colby?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how often he uses the splitter. That's kind of the new pitch for him. And we know that the Mariners are concerned about the usage of that pitch, so much so that they used it to justify taking him out with, 78 pitches in the 8th inning of a game in which he led 3-0. So that's their story and they're sticking to it. You guys by now know how I feel about that story, but we'll see how he uses the splitter. He's shown that he's willing to use it against righties and lefties, but that is a primary pitch to get out lefties. And so tonight, presumably, he'll be facing Bellinger, Bush, and Happ at least. So that'll be an important pitch against those three guys. But also the slider. There's going to be some righties who can do some damage in this lineup as well. So I think, for Bryce Miller, it's about, having command of at least one of those secondary pitches. And we know that the fastball is typically Miller's going to have good command of the fastball. That's something you can kind of bank on. It's not 100% certain, but you feel pretty good about Bryce Miller being able to kind of control the fastball and put it roughly where he wants it. And he'll have to do that tonight because the Cubs are a very patient team, like we talked about. They want to hit the ball out of the ballpark and they want to draw walks. They're middle of the pack in home runs right now, but they are second in all of baseball in walk percentage. They walk 12.2% of their at-bats so far, or plate appearances so far. That's quite high. For reference, the Mariners right now are running a 7.8% walk rate. So he's going to have to be in the zone, but he's going to have to be smart. with, the zone. He can't be in the middle of the plate. They will hit home runs off of him, even if it is in Seattle in April. So, he's got to be on the corners, and he's got to find at least one of the secondary pitches to have consistent success with. So, again, he should be well rested. He only threw 78 pitches his last time out. He did get an extra day's rest because of the day off yesterday. So he should be in a good spot. He should be able to go, 85, 90, 100 pitches, and we'll see how far he can get there. But yeah, I think tonight you're looking for the splitter or the sweeper. One of those two pitches, it would be very beneficial if he could have, at least 50, 55 command of one of those pitches today, or control at least. Get swings with it outside of the strike zone, throw it for a called strike every once in a while. Keep these guys honest, keep them on their toes, and, give your offense a chance to work against Wicks, who is off to a very good start, but doesn't have incredible stuff. It's a guy that, in theory, you should be able to get to, but so far the numbers are fantastic. So I think it's just, like we want from all of our starting pitchers, but particularly the young guys, the two young guys at the end, just keep your team in the ball game.
Yeah.
Go 6 or 7, give up 3 or less, and give your offense a real fighting chance against a Cubs lineup that's pretty good, pretty deep.
So let's talk about Jordan Wicks here, who has started 2 games so far this season, has only gone through 8 2/3 over the course of those 2 starts, but 13 strikeouts to just 4 walks over that time. So what do you think about Wicks, and what are you looking for out of this offense against Jordan Wicks? I mean, of course, don't strike out 15 times, but other than that, what are you looking for from this offense?
Or, hear me out, strike out 15 times and score 6 or 7 runs. I think you take that.
Sure.
Call me crazy. But
Sure.
Wicks is not really a prototypical lefty, but he's a guy who throws a lot of strikes. He is fastball in 92 mile per hour range with a very good changeup. The changeup is his best pitch. He has very good control and command of that pitch mostly. So Wicks is going to be, the Mariners are probably going to stack as many righties as they can in the lineup tonight. That's just what they do. Now that could be counterproductive because, again, Wicks's changeup is that good. And typically left on left, you don't see as many changeups. They're not as comfortable because that pitch tends to drift into that power zone. But the Mariners have almost exclusively just done straight platoon splits, not necessarily matchup based. So I suspect we'll see Dylan Moore in the lineup tonight. We'll probably see Urias at third base for the next couple days. So we'll see how they handle the changeup. If you can lay off the changeup, if you can avoid swinging and missing at that pitch, get him to throw you a fastball in a fastball count. He's not going to do it often, and get him in the middle of the plate. You have a chance to do some damage against him. So Wicks is an interesting arm, but it's a very a very high floor type of arm. So this is a guy that you could score some runs against, but you have to be disciplined at the plate. You can't chase the changeup. You have to get him up in the zone and attack when he does make a mistake. So you got to be aggressively smart. Like you have to be aggressive with a purpose against him, because if you start to expand the zone, particularly off the outside corner, he will eat you alive. You have to keep him in the zone. And if you do that, and you can kind of, spit on the changeup in those big, 2-0, 3-1 counts where he's probably going to give you a changeup instead of a fastball, force him to throw you that fastball in the zone, you're going to have a chance to put up some runs tonight, but it's easier said than done.
I feel like this is a good opportunity for someone like Dylan Moore, who's been swinging the bat pretty well lately. And hopefully this is a good opportunity for someone like Julio to actually find some grass and maybe do some damage, actually, if he finds grass, not just hit for some singles, but maybe, get a double, maybe even a triple, or hell, put 1 over the wall, put 2 over the wall. That would be great. Mitch Garver as well is someone that desperately needs a really good game. So we're going to talk about the other pitching matchups here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel and LinkedIn. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's LOCKEDON, and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you struggling to close deals? B2B selling is tougher than ever, and that's why I want to tell you about LinkedIn Sales Navigator. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a sales intelligence platform that helps professionals effectively prospect and engage high-value customers, drive higher revenue, and increase sales performance. Sales Navigator helps you target the right buyers, surface key signals such as job changes or which accounts you should prioritize, and shows you hidden allies so you can find those buyers that are most likely to convert. Fueled by LinkedIn's 1 billion member platform, Sales Navigator gives you the most up-to-date, first-party data, enabling you to unlock conversations with people that matter. Right now, you can try LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/LOCKEDON for a 60-day free trial. Let LinkedIn Sales Navigator help you sell like a superstar today. Just go to linkedin.com/lockedon and get started. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen as we get you set for the Mariners Cubs series starting tonight at T-Mobile Park. Just talked about tonight's pitching matchup between Bryce Miller and Jordan Wicks. Now let's talk about the next two pitching matchups. So tomorrow it is, of course, Emerson Hancock against Shota Imanaga. And Imanaga has yet to give up a run, earned or not, in his two starts in the major leagues. He has thrown a total of 10 innings over that time. He hasn't even walked anyone during that stretch yet. So Imanaga off to a really, really good start in his major league career. And of course, Imanaga was someone that we had in our offseason plan for the Mariners here on this show a few months back. So Hancock, we've talked about it. You just flat out said they should send him down. They should convert him to a reliever. He shouldn't make his next start. But as I predicted and as you agreed, the Mariners are not doing that, and they are going to allow him to make his next start. And I assume that he's going to make every start he is scheduled to make until Brian Wu returns, which you and I both do not agree with. So I won't even ask you about Hancock. I'll just ask you about Imanaga here, because I think we all know what you're going to say about Hancock. What have your impressions been of Shota Imanaga here in the early going?
Yeah, about what I expected. Overall, the stuff is definitely major league quality. There was really no question about that. He's come over and the stuff's played really well. Is he going to, go an entire year without giving up a run? No. Is he going to get roughed up every once in a while? Sure. That's just how it happens. But Imanaga is a really interesting pitcher. He's a lefty. Throws 92 to 93, but can touch 96. There's some deception in the delivery, so it's actually a quicker 92, 93 than it looks. And the split is his best pitch. That is the strikeout pitch. I think he's running like a 60% whiff rate on that right now. So clearly paired with the four-seam fastball and then the split, both thrown with deception, both are hard to pick up right away. That is a deadly combination. He throws a lot of strikes, like you already mentioned. So the Mariners offense will have their, they'll have their hands full with Imanaga, and you hope that, he leaves some pitches in the middle of the plate. You hope that maybe the split doesn't have quite as much bite as it normally does, and maybe he hangs a couple and you can take advantage of that. But you're going to more than likely have to try and scrape a few runs together off of Imanaga, if that. For the Mariners to win on Saturday, they need Emerson Hancock to have the game of his career, which, frankly, is not a high bar to clear, but it's one that, even his best probably isn't enough to give, the Mariners a good chance at winning that game. But baseball's weird, so You never really know how these things go. You can look at it on paper all you want and say, yeah, that's an easy win for so-and-so, but that's just not really how it works.
Look, I've been doing this show long enough with you to know that Emerson is going to go out there and somehow, some way, spend like 6 innings, 2 runs, and people are going to flood the comment section.
Good. It's good for the algorithm. That's fine. But you know what? I'm still right. So
Sure.
eventually, you guys will all come to the realization, oh, Colby was right. And you'll never admit it to me.
Right.
That's fine because I know when I won, the point. And that's all that really matters. So, yeah, if Hancock, just wants to go out there and surprise everybody and the Mariners can win on Saturday, that's literally stealing a win that you shouldn't have. Like, you have no right to think you deserve to win when you start Emerson Hancock. So every time you do win when he's out there, it is a massive bonus. I just wish that the Mariners weren't willing to effectively punt 1 out of every 5 games this early in the year, particularly when they're not playing that well and when they talked about how important it was for them to get off to a hot start. And yeah, they're just like, maybe we'll win 4 out of 5, but we're definitely not ever going to win 5 out of 5 with Emerson Hancock in our rotation. So, just priorities. But like I said, it's only a matter of time.
I feel bad for Emerson Hancock.
I don't.
Like,
actually, I do.
He's not good. Like, don't get me wrong here. He's not good. Like, we've addressed this. We've gone over this. But just as a person, how much you rip into this guy, I feel very bad for him.
First of all, Emerson's not listening to this. Second of all, I'll continue to rip into him as long as the Mariners keep on trying to force him to be something he's not. Third of all, I do feel bad for him because I would like to know what his career would have been like if he never suffered those shoulder injuries.
Sure.
Because this was not the guy that the Mariners drafted out of Georgia. Completely different pitcher. And the only way to explain that is the toll that a couple of shoulder injuries have had on him. Because I think if there's one thing we can pretty safely say about the Mariners, they can develop pitching. So I don't think this is an instance where the Mariners are doing him dirty with development or anything like this. I just think this is a guy who shell of what he was even just a few years ago, and he's trying to make it work, and he can't. He doesn't have the stuff. He doesn't have the command. So he's just not a major league quality starter. Those are facts.
So Sunday, it's Luis Castillo. We don't know who is pitching for the Cubs. We haven't talked about Castillo on this show since his start in Toronto. So what's going on with the guy? Because you go back to last September, it's been pretty rough more often than not for him.
Yeah. The interesting thing with Castillo is that it's not stuff. Typically, guys struggle like this. The velocity's way down, or the slider's not quite as sharp, or the changeup took a step back, and it's not really that. Velocity is fine for Castillo. Stuff is totally fine for Castillo. And the interesting thing is that in all 3 of his starts, we've seen extended glimpses of like, oh, there's Luis Castillo. There's the guy that we traded for. And there's the guy who is incredibly important to our success, not only this year but for the last year and a half prior. You see it for like one time through the rotate or one time through the lineup, and then something small goes wrong, and then he just can't quite seem to find the repeatability of his release point. So it's there. You can see it, right? You don't have to dream too hard on Luis Castillo getting back on track. The stuff is fine.
Yeah, and it's very clear that he hasn't fallen off.
Right. It's just something's not quite right here. Something's not quite clicking. I don't think it's injury related. Again, the stuff and the velocity, they're all fine. Velocity is actually up from where it usually is this early in the season. Castillo is also a notoriously slow starter. So it was only really last year that he got off to a really good start. Other than that, in his career, he's got knocked around early in the year as he kind of tries and gets a feel for his command. But I think it's pretty simply, this is a command and control issue. He's not walking a lot of guys, which is good, but he's running a lot of 3-ball counts. He's running a lot of deep counts. It's not uncommon for him to have 6, 7, 8, 9 pitch at bats a couple of them throughout the night, and that's really doing a number on his pitch count. And those are exhausting at bats because every pitch is got a little bit of extra, leverage to it. So,
and he's given up some damage on 2 strikes as well.
Yes. Right. And it's because the command. It's because Cal Raleigh will set up for a fastball away and it'll run back into the middle of the plate. Yeah. And they're not missing that. And then, you set up inside and it's running too far off the inside corner and he's not even making competitive pitches against left-handed hitters with his fastball. So it's really all about command. Mechanically, I don't see anything so horrible that like my untrained eyes could see it. But I've also, listened to some people who do know that, and they seem to don't think that it's like anything major. They think that it's, it's just a tweak here and there. It's not like he's drastically lowered his arm slot or anything like that, or he's flying open on occasion. His front side flies open, and that's going to lead to, pitches running out over the middle of the plate, particularly if you start him glove side. So he's got to stay closed a little bit longer, but it's really just about throwing better quality pitches. And again, in all 3 of his starts, we have seen 2 or 3 innings where he looks like Luis Castillo, and you're like, this is great. This is exactly what you're supposed to look like. And then inevitably, he'll have one long at bat. He doesn't locate. He runs a deep count. That guy gets on base. And then, bada bing, bada boom. It's just gone for 5, 6, 7 hitters in a row. And that's when the opponent strikes. And that's when Castillo gets into trouble. Once the bleeding starts, he's been very bad at stopping it. Mm-hmm. And it's not realistic to say like, oh, we'll just never get into danger. Like every starter is going to have some moments where they have to pitch around some trouble. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like, oh, well, just don't let anybody on base. It's like, okay, well, if he could do that at will, he would be in the Hall of Fame and he would have, 200 perfect games. Like, so he's going to have to figure out how to stop the bleeding. Like giving up a run in an inning isn't horrific. It isn't like the worst thing in the world. Giving up 3 or 4 is unacceptable, particularly for a guy with Castillo's stuff. So I think he's got to stay close a little bit. He's got to really refine that command, and he's got to find that sinker. I do wonder maybe there is a point where he just kind of, because you're like, when we think of Luis Castillo dominance, I think most of us think of that start in Toronto in the playoffs.
Yep.
That wasn't a high strikeout game.
Yeah.
That was, I think, 5 or 6 strikeouts in 7, and that was just 97 with a running sinker and then going change up and slider off of that. And that was pitch to contact Luis Castillo as much as, Luis Castillo can be. So I do wonder maybe there's kind of a emphasis on going back to the sinker tonight instead of the 4-seamer, just to try and see if you can get something. But Sunday night, I should say, Sunday afternoon to be technical. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I do know that he's flying open a little bit on the front side, which again, if you're aiming for his glove side, that is going to cause the 2-seamer and sinker to cut straight into the middle of the plate. And that is a dangerous, dangerous place to be for anybody. So I think it's just command right now.
So before we get out of here, yesterday we explained the scouting scale, the 2080 scouting scale, and we asked you guys in the comments below if you would like us to explain other terminology and other stats that we use here on the show. And we got a comment from Will Narvaez asking us to explain the difference between WRC Plus and WAR, which are 2 stats that you and I both use quite frequently here on the show. So WRC Plus, just to start with that one, WRC Plus basically takes your overall offensive production and gives it a numerical value. It is park adjusted. It does not treat every ballpark as equal. And it obviously values, doubles, triples, home runs more than, say, walks or singles, etc. As well. The league average, because you don't really need to know the nitty gritty of how WRC Plus works to kind of just generally be able to read it and understand it. But the league average WRC, there is a formula. If
you are interested, you can go look it up. But
right,
yeah.
But very simply, the league average WRC Plus is 100. That never changes. That is always the league average.
Right. It's worth noting that WRC Plus is very simple in that every single point you are above or below 100, that just represents 1%. So if you are a 100 WRC plus versus a 105 WRC plus, the 105 is 5% better
Yeah.
than the 100.
You've probably heard us. You probably heard us on the show over the course of this offseason talk about how someone took a 20% jump or a 30% decrease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that based off of WRC plus.
Right. And it's, again, weighted runs created, weighted.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So not everything is valued the same. And that's why we like the stat, is that it's a stat that on base percentage counts home runs and walks as the same. Well, we know they're not the same. Slugging doesn't account for walks at all. It doesn't.
Batting average treats a single as equal as to a home run. Yeah.
Right. And, slugging doesn't account for, hey, I hit a home run, but other than that, I went, 1 for 10. It's like, okay, well, you're still slugging 400, even though you're 1 for 10 with 9 strikeouts. Right. So WRC plus is just an attempt to kind of encapsulate the overall picture of a hitter. WRC plus is hitter only. We'll get to the difference here between WAR in a second. And just kind of tells you, like, versus the league, this guy is X percent better. And that percent is however many points above or below you are of 100. So if you're a 70 WRC plus guy, you are 30% below league average. You're 130, you're 30% above league average. So that's all it is. It's just telling you how much better than average they are is really what you use it for.
Yeah. Yeah. It's basically, if you want to look at it in a very simplified way, it's just a score for a hitter. It's a grade for a hitter, essentially. All right. So now, what is WAR, Colby?
Yeah. So WAR it's another mathematical equation. Now, there's
wins above replacement.
Yeah. It stands for wins above replacement. Replacement level players are 0. Replacement level players are essentially AAA Tacoma players. They are not top pro. They are like Jason Vossler, right? Like just a guy who can come up and just kind of survive in the big leagues. They are not that valuable overall. So wins above replacement, that's what a replacement is 0. So yeah, WAR is a cumulative stat. So it values playing a lot. It values, producing over an extended period of time. That's how you get the really high WARs. It's really hard to get a 6 WAR if you're not playing in 140 games, right? So it's a cumulative stat, which doesn't make it perfect. But essentially what it does, it tries to tell you how many wins this guy would give you over a player that would replace him in AAA. So how many wins would Julio give you over Jason Vossler, right? If Julio is a 6-win player, then they estimate that he's 6 wins more valuable than the replacement level guy who would come up and try and, take his place. So there is a formula for this. There are 2 different WARs that are commonly used. There's B WAR, which is baseball reference WAR, and there's F WAR, which is Fangraphs WAR.
Yep.
They both have their own formula, so they're not exactly the same. And it kind of depends on how much you want to weigh certain things. There's a difference in how, I believe, like home runs versus home runs per 9 is a big one in Fangraphs versus baseball reference. So, you kind of have to look at both of them. I think most people have their preference. I know Ty really likes Fangraphs.
That's just because, since I started really getting into advanced stats, I just read Fangraphs, right? It's not because I necessarily prefer their formula over the other. It's just what I'm used to.
Right. So WAR, while WRC plus focuses only on swinging the bat, WAR tries to encompass everything. And there's pitcher WAR and there's hitter WAR too. So there's no WRC plus for pitchers. That's only offense. WAR is simply how much better are you than just a replacement level player? They factor in defense, they factor in base running, they factor in offense, home runs, stolen bases, strikeouts, pitchers, it's innings pitched, like everything goes into it. Yep. And it's just trying to get how valuable that player is down to a number. If you're 2 wins, you're considered an everyday player. Like you can play 145 games a year for a team.
So when we've talked about Luis Arias, right?
Yeah.
Just to use him as a specific example here, in 2021 and 2022, Luis Arias was worth 2 wins in each of those 2 seasons. So when we have said Luis Arias, has been recently removed from being an everyday player, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're referencing.
Right. Typically 4 wins is about when you start to get to all-star range. 6 wins is pretty much perennial all-star. And then Once you start getting above that, 7, 8, 9 wins, those are legitimate MVP candidates. And again, it encompasses everything. It's fielding, it's pitching. It's fielding, it's base running, it's hitting. If you're, an offensive player, if you're pitching, it's how many innings do you pitch? How many strikeouts do you have? Like, what's your ERA? What's your WHIP? Like all of it. But again, keep in mind, particularly for pitching, WAR is a cumulative stat. So starting pitchers, like an average starting pitcher, just a 2-win starting pitcher, is deemed more valuable than almost every single reliever in baseball, because most relievers, they're just not going to have enough innings to put up a high WAR. So when you see a reliever who's worth 1 win, that doesn't sound like much, but that is a massive number for a reliever. That's
right.
Top.
I believe there were only 3 relievers this past year that accumulated 2+ F4. Matt Brash was one of them.
One. Yep.
Yeah.
I think Bautista was one of the others, and Evan Phillips, I believe.
Evan Phillips. Yeah.
I think it was Felix Bautista.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'll double check it. But yeah.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, right, it's very simple. WAR is just trying to tell you, it's just trying to put one number on the value of a player. Is it perfect? No, by no stretch is it perfect. But it's just a good, quick way to give you an idea of like how good was this, how valuable is this player to this team right now. And I think this is part that blows people's minds. If every single player on your team, all 26 players, just put up 2 WAR and they were nothing else, in theory, the math would suggest that you would win 95 ball games.
Mm-hmm.
So 2-win players are important players.
Yeah.
We say they're just average everyday players. Yeah, there's not a lot of those guys relative to the sport. So
yeah.
So
the 4 relievers had 2+ F4 this past year. Brash, David Bednar, Felix Bautista, and Tanner Scott was worth almost 3 wins.
Wow.
Yeah, 2.8 F4 for Tanner Scott. I didn't know that. That's crazy. He threw almost 80 innings this past year, though. So there you go.
Still, that's a lot for only 80 innings.
Yeah. But that's kind of a prime example of what you were explaining, at least, in terms of the extreme, right? So, so WAR isn't a perfect stat, but it does kind of give you a general idea of how valuable a player is relative to others. But WRC Plus, if you ask me what my favorite stat in baseball is, it's probably WRC Plus, because again, it's just an all-encompassing offensive stat that does account for a lot of different factors in the game. So it definitely does help, and it definitely, I find a lot of the time it does reflect the results on the field, especially when kind of just box score scouting other teams that I don't really have a chance to watch beforehand. Going into a series. So
right, very simply put, WRC Plus and WAR are both about getting the value of a player to one number. WAR is just about the overall value of the player. So if you're not a great bat, but you're a great glove, that's going to count for that. WRC Plus is just getting about how great of a hitter you are down to one number.
Right. I think on an episode next week, we should talk a little bit about OPS and why you and I don't really like OPS. It's a newer stat that a lot of casual fans have taken to.
Sure.
But it's become more popularized recently, and a lot of casual fans have taken to it. I mean, at the Rogers Center and the Blue Jays games up on the big board, they don't even have batting average. It's OPS on there. Which I think is incredibly silly. So we'll get into why
average is more valuable than even OPS.
Yeah, we'll get into probably on a later episode next week into why we don't really like OPS and just kind of explain that whole thing. But we got to get out of here now. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dane Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day and a beautiful baseball weekend, and we'll see you next time. Peace.